probably covered everything, but if anybody wants to ask me a question, I'd be happy to answer it. I guess I did.
Questions, anybody?
I have a question. When you started writing Napa, was it from an angle of you were going to be reporting and you got to those people, but they didn't know, as you said, for a newspaper it's one thing, but not for a book. So how did you betray their confidence, or did you just know full well that this was where you're going?
Now wait a minute, I didn't. I never said that. No, that's a very good question. And it's the question I ask myself first, all the time. I belong to the antediluvian school of taking notes in relatively large spiral notebooks. Right? From that book, I have probably 50 still in my basement. I put a big number, Roman numeral on the cover of each one. When I filled it up, I wrote the names of all the people I talked to in order right on the front cover. I carried that thing around in the back of my pants the whole time I was there. Every time I was with somebody talking to them, I was taking notes. Hello? I said in the beginning, I'm writing a book about the valley and what happened here. True. And I may use this, I may not use it, but, you know, and then I would ask a question. Now, that was the drill. There were occasions where people would say, I don't want what I'm about to tell you to be used. So, and I didn't use that. I was frankly astonished that people talked to me the way they did. And, you know, you're all writers. Somebody starts doing that, you don't say, wait a minute, are you sure you want to say that? You know, but if you're writing it, you know, you're writing it. And so that's how things proceeded. But I was really lucky. A couple of things prevailed. One, which will not prevail today, believe me. As you all know, people are a lot more careful today. There was an assumption in Napa Valley at the time that everybody loved them and whatever they did was considered cool. And in large part that was right. This was, you know, Paris tasting had done what it did. A phenomenal achievement, really. And it was great stuff being done and great people there. And I made friends, some of whom I still have. I was lucky in the sense that I just happened to show up when they were in the middle of the biggest environmental fight they had had in Napa Valley since the establishment of the agricultural preserve in 1968. And this was, when I was there, it was in the early 90s, into the 80s, or around 1990. And there was a huge fight going on about it was called the winery definition, a boring way to talk about it, to describe it, but in fact it was a big fight about what wineries could get away with and how much development there was going to be in the valley. Big deal. And you can imagine how things split. And I got really interested in that. I'd written a book about public lands in the West because I got interested in the environment at that time. And so about the second half of the book is about that. And I became, just by inadvertently, I became kind of the one person, one of the few people at both sides were talking to. So people were trying to spin me from one side or the other, you know. So, and some of them were just talking, but anyway, they would talk to me, and then they would say, what did she say about this, about somebody on the side, which I was not a conduit for information, at least not knowing. And so that's what happened. Everything I did, the only place I took notes surreptitiously was with the gonads. And I don't feel too guilty about that. And so I was surprised when this came out. And as I said earlier, it reminded me of the South, where people sometimes assume that you're a believer in the call, whatever the cause is. And then they're shocked. They're shocked. You know, the gambling's going on in this hotel. But it was, in retrospect, it was obvious. And well, I won't go into it, but there were a couple of instances where there were really painful stories emerged later. after someone had talked to me in great detail. And then I found out later that they had not told me the whole thing. And I didn't use, in one case I didn't use that, the other case I did use what I discovered later because it was quite relevant to the story itself. This was the part about Englewood and John Daniel's demise. I did use that because I figured this was, she should have told me about that at the beginning and said, you know, someone else had to tell me, but it was so crucial to the story itself and so germane, and I found out about it other ways I hadn't. So that answers your question. But people still didn't forget.
It wasn't really betraying confidence, but you were there, able to, you were present when they let their guard down.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Look, I mean, if, you know, we're not priests and priestesses. I mean, when people start doing that, you're a writer. You're supposed to, if you think you're really after what's real and what's true, you're supposed to do it. You're not supposed to be liked by everybody. You know, more liked you are, probably the less effective reporter you are. So that's at least that's what I found in journalism, the newspaper, the magazine writing, and I think it's true.
Aside from probably writing regularly, what do you do to keep your writing skills sharp? Are there specific books you like to read or periodicals you like, or how do you keep your skills sharp?
You mean for writing? Well, I don't know. I'm sure reading is really important. The craft itself, you know, I was sort of afflicted with writing when I was in high school, and you know, from the age of about 19 or so, until this did sort of change when I got into fiction again. I used to write every single day in the morning, made myself do it. I had nothing to say, but I did it. And that's what I was talking about. You build up those calluses. You get in the habit of sitting, and it's, you know, it's not meditation. I don't want to sound too glorious, but the idea is, if you get in the habit of sitting down every day, and it's obvious, people say it all the time, it's true, you get to the point where your mind begins to work, it's the old subconscious things start coming out, you write, and then eventually when the stuff comes you want to deal with, the inspiration comes, you can deal with it. Factual writing is a little bit different. Factual writing I always found was easier. Some of it's drudgery, but it's easier to do. In the old days I used to stack material up, sort of dig down through it, just start toss the books, you know, and then you get stories. I mean, one thing that developed, what she was just asking about, I did notice, there was another stroke of luck that in Napa, I noticed very soon when I started talking to people that there was this vast matrix of storylines overlapping. People, this person was collecting this person. It was amazing. And when you start hearing that about a particular place, particularly an insular place where it's just where it usually takes, where it usually happens, I knew there was a real collective communal story here to be told. And that turned me on, I must admit.
Yes, thank you for your talk. You painted a pretty complete picture of the profession of writing. Talked about today's writers not having the educated readers they used to have, and publishers becoming addicted to free or almost free content. Wondering to what extent you think bloggers contributed to the difficulties that writers are having today with their free content and content.
How you've contributed to the problem?
How are bloggers with all their free content?
No, you haven't contributed to the problem. I think you're manifested by the problems. I think people want to write. How can any of us resist the allure of being able to sit down and write and actually get people, a fair number of people, to read what you're writing without having to go through the channels? So I think that wine blogging and other blogging has, as I said, democratized the entire industry. I think the problem with publishers, I don't think that really is making publishers, but I think wine bloggers or not all bloggers, anybody writing on the web is inadvertently enabling publishers, because publishers, they do a lot of work for publishers. You do a lot of work for publishers. They can pick and choose among their stuff. They have a ready supply of people who are willing to write articles or even books for very little money now, because there is an alternative, because people can go and supposedly can go and publish their own books. In some ways this is very good, in some ways it's not. As I said before, you would have thought it would make publishers try harder, but it doesn't. It's weird, but it has absolutely the opposite effect. They're taking what they can get, and what they can get is quite often writing that they don't have to pay for, or don't have to pay enough to make any difference. And consequently, this feeds more the desire for people more to write their own stuff. You get more of a dilution in there. There's great stuff in there, but now it's falling back on the individual writer to figure out a way to get it out. Now, my age is part of the problem too. Younger people are going to be able to deal with this stuff electronically, technically, and personally better than I. I mean, most people are just pretty young, but I will tell you that if you've got a book contract and you're over 40, my advice is don't go to New York and meet the editor. He or she will know how old you are, but they won't know really what that means until they confront you. So, deal from your study is my advice. There's a whole new idea about what is supposed to constitute writers and material. And the only thing you can do as writers is write as well as you can. Write for yourself as much as you can. You can't always do that. And try, because I sound like a school teacher, but try to tell the stories, because behind all of that, we all like to be snarky occasionally. We all like our tasting notes, and that has room, but look for the stories behind it. Because if you find them and you really get in with people, you can develop that, and you can do the rear guard action, and you'll end up in print if that's what you're looking for. But it's hard because you've got a lot of competition that didn't exist a few years ago.
Do you think Napa's that unique, or is it just the wine culture? Because if you look back at the dimensions, there's a whole lifestyle and there's the wine. Is it something that we could explore in different areas, just to find the stories that you found in Napa? Or do you think Napa is just kind of a great way to publicize itself?
No, I think sure you can. It's just that I think Napa was different for a couple of reasons. One is wine became more than wine became sort of the anti-Dionysian impulse. How many times do you hear vintners talk about how people get stoned on their Cabernet? You don't hear that. That's not, the Dionysian impulse is not what the high-end wine industry is about. It's about control and position and status. And because Napa, makes great wine constantly, has a big, long tradition for America going back. And it's a small place, very contained, and it became, the real enduring subject in America is not wine, other than real estate. Real estate's our story. And wine is an expression of that. And Manifest Destiny is about real estate, essentially. And wine became, because of its allure, because of what as I said, what it can do for the individuals, it became an entirely uplifting, enigmatic, unique substance. I mean, wine isn't particularly, here's a substance that we all love the way it tastes and the way it makes us feel, but it really doesn't have much nutritional value. It doesn't even last. A $2,000 bottle of Petrus is, it has its limits. And yet, people will spend millions of dollars to bump up from 98 to 99. It's amazing on the scale. I can't think of any other commodity or substance about which that can be said. And I think that's fascinating. I've never really figured it out. But think about, if you're asking me what one to think about it theoretically. How has wine changed? How has perception of wine changed? What does it say? As I said, I think it's a keyhole that looks into a lot of different places. If you figure out a way to do that, I think it's worthwhile and I think it would be fun.
I think I know the answer, but can you describe the type of wine that you like?
I like bourbon. That was a sweet question, but I don't know what I'm going to answer. I love Cabernet. I like Rhone varieties. I'm a red wine guy, I guess, generally speaking. I'm not really an expert, nor have I claimed to be. I'm not a wine critic. I'm one of those dreaded wine writers, which means doubly opportunistic, but I'm glad I did it in the end. Anybody else?
So what words would you have for a newer wine region like the Okanagan then, based on what you've seen in Napa over the decades?
Well, there's really great wine being made here. That was, and you've got, it's bigger than Napa. You've got great wine. You've got as much sunshine. Well, maybe not quite, but it's an amazing place. I think if you're asking about what should be done here, I think the whole idea of terroir, if you figure that out, is a good one. Individuality. I mean, Napa, Sonoma, other places, Russian River, there are these resonant names, and I guess I would suggest doing that. I mean, the valley's pretty darn big, so some way of figuring out, or at least for Americans, how to think about it. I don't know what everybody does in the business about the Chinese. I think that's, from what I know of it, this is going to be a transformation. You guys should all be learning to write in Chinese because it seems to me that's going to be transformation. The suck of high-end wines westward across the Pacific and high-end Scotch and bourbon and all the stuff that we complain about paying $50 to $60 a bottle for. I don't think that stuff's going to be available for anything like that in the years ahead, and that's something that might be worth thinking about. Also, I stress, I keep saying, think about some way of writing. I try to write the place into the stuff I write about wine. Place, this novel, the valley is a character in the book because that's the way I feel about it. So that's, I think here, if people living here would have to think about the place in that same way. And I think County is fortunate. BC's fortunate in having a place where really good wine can be made, because you can't say that. I mean, there's good wine being made in Virginia, not much, but you would be surprised at the quality of some of the 2 or 3 or 4 Cabernets being made there. And they don't have the sun, they don't have the aridity, they don't have the things that really are most required. So, I would say concentrate on terroir on place associated with particular varieties.
So do you have your notepad with you, and are you taking notes as you
No. This is all off the record. I am writing a prequel to Nose. I don't know how far that's, I'm about halfway through, but I don't know if I'm going to finish that or not. It's set in the same valley that is in Nose, which is much like Napa Valley. And it's set in the late 70s after the Paris tasting when Clyde Craven Jones leaves an unhappy love affair in London. And he doesn't weigh 300 pounds, he's a hunk. And he comes to the valley and gets involved with the 3 daughters in the Mormon wine estate, but who knows? That's
Other questions, anybody?
Thanks very much.